I was 64 years old when my only daughter decided to humiliate me in my own dining room. Picture this, a beautifully set table, the smell of roasted lamb filling the air, and crystal wine glasses catching the evening light. I had spent 6 hours cooking this meal. My daughter, Vanessa, and her husband, Greg, had invited Greg's wealthy parents over for dinner. I didn't mind cooking. I enjoyed hosting. But I quickly realized I wasn't invited to be a host. I was just there to serve. Throughout the evening, Vanessa and Greg ignored me, eagerly talking to his parents about their future plans, expensive vacations, and Greg's new consulting business. When the topic turned to education and success, Greg's mother looked at me with a pitying smile, asking where I had gone to college. Before I could answer, Vanessa rolled her eyes. "Oh, please." Mom barely finished high school. She took a sip of her wine, leaning back in her chair. At a family dinner, my daughter mocked me. She looked right at her in-laws and sighed. No degree. No future, just a worthless old woman who cleans up after us. Everyone laughed. Greg chuckled loudly, and his parents exchanged amused glances. They expected me to lower my head. They expected me to shrink into the background, maybe retreat to the kitchen in tears, like a defeated victim. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I simply put down my fork, wiped my mouth with my linen napkin, and smiled. "You have no idea who I am," I replied calmly. Then I told her the truth, and the room went silent. What exactly did I tell her? I will get to that. But first, if you have ever been disrespected by the people you sacrificed everything for, do me a favor. Hit the like button and subscribe. Let me know in the comments where you are watching from. Now, let me take you back to how this nightmare started and exactly how I ended it. To understand how Vanessa grew so bold, you need to understand the boundaries I allowed her to cross. 18 months before that dinner, Vanessa and Greg asked to move into my home. They claimed they needed to save money for a down payment on a luxury house in the suburbs. My husband passed away 3 decades ago, leaving me to raise Vanessa alone. I figured I had a large house, plenty of space, and she was my daughter. Why not? That was my first mistake. Within a week, they completely took over. They moved my belongings out of the master suite and claimed it for themselves. They filled the garage with Greg's golf clubs and Vanessa's endless online shopping boxes. They stopped buying groceries, simply eating whatever I stocked in the fridge. I am not the type of woman to complain endlessly. I observe. I watch actions. Words mean very little to me, but behavior tells you everything you need to know about a person's character. Greg treated me like the hired help. He would leave his dirty shoes in the middle of the hallway and drop his laundry outside my bedroom door. Vanessa became incredibly controlling, dictating what time I should have dinner ready and demanding I stay out of the living room when they had friends over. I never yelled. I never threw a tantrum. I just watched them get more comfortable, more entitled, and more arrogant. They thought my silence meant I was weak. They assumed that because I didn't argue, I lacked a spine. They truly believed I was entirely dependent on their presence to feel useful in my old age. But I wasn't an old fool. I was taking mental notes every single day. I knew exactly what was happening in my own house. I just decided to let them dig their own hole a little deeper before I finally took away the shovels. Let me explain why Vanessa thought I was an uneducated nobody. When my husband died, I was 34 with a young child. I didn't have a college degree. I didn't have a fancy corporate resume. I had to put food on the table. So I started cleaning offices at night. Vanessa grew up seeing me in a uniform, smelling like bleach and floor wax. She was embarrassed by me. She wanted a mother in a pantsuit, not a mother with calloused hands. What Vanessa refused to see was what happened after she left for college. I didn't just clean offices. I observed how the businesses ran. I saved every penny. I hired a few other women, then a dozen. By the time Vanessa married Greg, my little cleaning hustle had become a premier commercial facility management company. I sold that company 5 years ago for a very comfortable sum. I kept a few key commercial real estate properties that generate significant passive income every month. I never flaunted my wealth. I kept living in the same house, driving the same reliable car, and wearing the same simple clothes. I valued security over showing off. Vanessa assumed my house was paid off by my late husband's life insurance and that I lived on a tiny fixed income. She genuinely believed she and Greg were doing me a massive favor by gracing me with their presence. She thought they were the successful ones because they drove a leased luxury SUV and wore designer brands they couldn't actually afford. I never corrected her. I wanted her to learn the value of hard work on her own. But arrogance blinded her. She didn't realize that the very lifestyle she enjoyed under my roof was entirely funded by the worthless woman she loved to look down upon. That dinner party was the final straw. The morning after, everything changed. I woke up the morning after the dinner party at 6 a.m. The house was quiet. Vanessa and Greg always slept until at least 9 a.m. on weekends. I didn't wake up angry. I didn't feel the need to scream or demand an apology. Apologies are just words. And, as I mentioned, I only deal in actions. I brewed a cup of black coffee, sat at my kitchen island, and opened my laptop. It was time to redefine our arrangement. First, I logged into my banking portal. A year ago, I had generously added Vanessa as an authorized user on one of my premium credit cards for emergencies. She had been using it for expensive brunches and spa days. With 2 clicks, her access was permanently revoked. Next, I logged into the utility accounts, the high-speed premium internet, the one Greg absolutely needed for his online gaming and supposed business calls, was downgraded to the absolute lowest, slowest, basic package. Then, I went to the autopay settings. I had been paying the insurance on their leased SUV because Vanessa had cried about a tight budget last Christmas. I quietly removed my banking details from the account. Finally, I called the private landscaping and housekeeping service I employed. I told them to pause all operations at my address indefinitely. If my daughter and son-in-law wanted to live in a clean house with a manicured lawn, they could use their own hands. I closed my laptop, washed my coffee mug, and walked out to the garden to pull some weeds. I felt completely at peace. I didn't need a dramatic confrontation. I didn't need to explain myself. I simply withdrew my resources. Now, all I had to do was wait for them to wake up and collide with reality. By 10:30 a.m., the peaceful morning ended. I heard the heavy footsteps of Vanessa stomping down the stairs. I stayed in the garden, watering my tomatoes, until the back door flew open. Mom, Vanessa shouted, her face flushed with frustration. "Did you do something to the Wi-Fi? Greg can't load his conference call? And my phone says the network is unstable. I kept watering the plants." I downgraded the package. I replied calmly, not looking back. The premium plan was too expensive. She scoffed, crossing her arms. "Are you serious? You know Greg needs high speed for his business. And another thing, I just tried to order breakfast delivery and my card was declined. Did you freeze the account?" I turned off the hose, dried my hands on my apron, and finally looked at her. "I didn't freeze the account. I removed your name from it. An uneducated, worthless old woman really shouldn't be funding your expensive lifestyle. Vanessa, you and Greg are highly successful adults. You can pay for your own breakfast and your own internet. Her jaw dropped. She stared at me, trying to find a hint of a joke in my expression. There wasn't one. "You're doing this because of last night?" she asked, her voice turning defensive. "It was just a joke." Mom, you are so sensitive. You're really going to throw a tantrum over a harmless comment. I smiled lightly. I'm not throwing a tantrum. I'm just adjusting my budget. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have things to do. I walked right past her and went into the house. She stood in the yard, completely speechless. The boundaries were officially reset, and she had no idea how to handle a mother who didn't argue back. About an hour later, Greg decided it was his turn to put me in my place. He marched into the kitchen where I was chopping vegetables for my own lunch. He carried himself with that unearned confidence he always displayed. "Maxine, we need to talk," he demanded, leaning against the counter. "Vanessa is upstairs crying. You're being completely unreasonable. You need to turn the internet back up and fix the credit card situation. We live here too." I kept chopping my carrots. "You live here rent-free. Greg, you don't own this house. You don't make the rules." He sneered. "We are doing you a favor by keeping you company. You'd be lonely and helpless without us." I stopped chopping and looked him dead in the eye. "Hand me the keys to the SUV. Greg?" He blinked, thrown off by the sudden shift. "What? No. I have meetings." I paid the down payment on that lease, and the contract is entirely in my name. I stated plainly. "Give me the keys, or I will use my spare right now and drive it straight back to the dealership. Your choice." He puffed out his chest, trying to intimidate me. "You wouldn't dare. You're bluffing." I didn't waste another word on him. I dried my hands, walked to the key hook by the door, grabbed my spare fob, and walked straight out to the driveway. I unlocked the SUV, climbed into the driver's seat, and started the engine. Greg ran out the front door, shouting, but I simply backed out of the driveway and drove away. I drove straight to the dealership, paid the early termination fee in cash, and handed them the keys. I took a pleasant taxi ride home. I didn't need to argue with Greg. I just took away the toys he couldn't afford. When I returned home, the atmosphere was incredibly tense. Greg and Vanessa were sitting on the living room sofa, looking like deflated balloons. Their luxury car was gone, their internet was crawling, and their pockets were empty. I ignored them entirely. I walked into the kitchen and began the next phase of my household reclamation. I pulled out a heavy-duty combination padlock I had purchased on the way home and attached it to the large pantry cabinet where I kept all the expensive non-perishables, snacks, and imported coffees. Then, I installed a small lock on the deep freezer in the garage, securing the premium meats and seafood I bought with my own money. Vanessa walked into the kitchen just as I was spinning the dial on the pantry lock. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and panic. "Are you locking up the food?" "My food," I corrected her smoothly. "You two are independent adults with bright futures. You can certainly afford to stock your own groceries. One shelf in the main fridge is yours. The rest belongs to me." "We don't have a car to go to the store," she shouted. "There is a bus stop 3 blocks away," I replied, pouring myself a glass of iced tea. "Or you can walk. The exercise will do you good." She glared at me, her face red. "You are being vindictive. You can't just cut us off from food in our own house. It is not your house," I reminded her softly. "It is mine, and I am simply protecting my assets from freeloaders." She stormed off, dialing her phone furiously. I knew exactly who she was calling. She was calling for backup, but I was more than ready. The next afternoon, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Greg's parents, Arthur and Diane, standing on my porch. They looked incredibly smug, clearly ready to lecture me about family duties. Maxine. Diane started immediately, pushing her way into the foyer. Vanessa called us in tears. We need to have a serious conversation about your behavior. You cannot treat your children this way. It is incredibly selfish. I didn't invite them to sit. I remained standing in the hallway, my posture straight. Diane, you raised a son who lives rent-free in my home, disrespects me daily, and can't afford his own car, I said evenly. If you are so concerned about their well-being, you can fund them. I reached into my pocket and pulled out an envelope I had prepared. I handed it to Arthur. What is this? He asked, frowning. That is an itemized invoice. I explained. It covers 18 months of rent, utilities, groceries, car insurance, and cleaning services that I have provided for your son and my daughter. The total is just over $60,000. Diane gasped. You can't be serious. We aren't paying this. Then I suggest you stop telling me how to manage my finances in my own home, I replied firmly. You thought I was an uneducated maid. In reality, I have been bankrolling your son's illusion of success. Arthur bristled. Greg has a thriving consulting business. He doesn't need your money. I laughed lightly. A genuine, relaxed laugh. Oh, Arthur, you really don't know who I am. Do you? Greg's business isn't thriving. He has one major client keeping him afloat, and it's time you learned exactly who that client is. I stepped back and opened the front door wider, gesturing for them to leave. Vanessa and Greg had come downstairs, standing behind Arthur and Diane. Greg looked furious. Don't insult my business, Maxine, Greg warned. My contract with Sterling Management is expanding next month. I'll be making more than you ever saw in your life. I looked at him with absolute pity. Sterling Management. I repeated slowly. The property management firm that handles 20 commercial buildings downtown. You got that contract 8 months ago, right around the time you moved in here. Yeah, because I earned it. Greg snapped. I shook my head. No, Greg, you got it because I made a phone call. I built Sterling Management from the ground up 20 years ago. I sold it. But the current CEO is my old business partner. I asked him to give my son-in-law a small probationary contract to help you get on your feet. Greg's face turned completely white. Vanessa stopped breathing. The room went dead silent, just like at the dinner party. I spoke to the CEO this morning. I continued, my voice calm and steady. I told him I am no longer personally backing your work. From now on, your contracts are based entirely on your own merit. Greg swallowed hard. He knew, and I knew, that his work was sloppy. Without my silent protection, Sterling Management would drop him by Friday. You own Sterling, Vanessa whispered, her eyes wide with shock. The myth she had built about her worthless, uneducated mother crumbled into dust right before her eyes. I owned it. Now, I just own this house. And the door is right there, I said, pointing outside. You have exactly 48 hours to pack your belongings and leave my property. Your free ride is over. They didn't argue. When you take away someone's false sense of superiority and show them the cold, hard facts, they have nothing left to fight with. For the next 2 days, the house was a flurry of cardboard boxes and frantic phone calls. Greg's parents refused to let them move in, citing a lack of space in their massive home. Vanessa and Greg were forced to sign a lease on a tiny, cramped apartment on the other side of town. On their final morning, Vanessa stood by the front door, holding a small box. She looked exhausted. "Mom," she started, her voice shaking. "I'm sorry about what I said at the dinner. I was just trying to impress them." "Can't we just go back to normal?" I looked at her. I didn't feel anger, but I also didn't feel the urge to rescue her anymore. "This is normal, Vanessa," I replied softly. "Normal is adults paying their own way. Normal is respecting the people who help you. I love you, but I will not allow you to disrespect me in my own sanctuary ever again." She nodded slowly, a tear slipping down her cheek, and walked out the door. I didn't chase her. I closed the door, locked the deadbolt, and took a deep breath. The house was finally quiet. Over the next week, I hired painters to redo the master bedroom. I bought new furniture. I reclaimed every inch of the space that I had worked so hard to earn. Let me tell you something. Setting boundaries does not make you a bad mother. Protecting your peace does not make you selfish. If you are constantly pouring your resources into people who treat you like dirt, stop pouring. Take back your keys, take back your space, and take back your life. Thank you for listening to my story. If you found any courage in this, hit subscribe and share this video. Remember, your worth is never determined by someone else's lack of respect. Stay strong and protect your peace.